Srimad Bhagavad Gita, Chapter 2, Sankhya Yoga, Introduction. Duryodhana mentioned the great warriors of the two armies, but Dronacharya did not utter any word to him. So Duryodhana became sad. Then Bhishma blew his conch loudly to cheer Duryodhana. Hearing the sound of his conch, the conch's drums and the cow horns, etc., of the Kaurava army and the Pandava army blared forth. Afterwards, from the 20th verse, the dialogue between Sri Krishna Paramatma and Arjuna began. Arjuna asked Lord Krishna to place his chariot between the two armies. The Lord, having placed the chariot between the two armies in front of Bhishma and Drona, etc., asked Arjuna to behold those Kurus. Having seen his kinsmen, he was filled with so much of compassion and sadness that he, casting away his bow and arrows, sat on the seat of the chariot. Sanjaya starts the second chapter in order to tell Dhritarashtra what Sri Krishna Paramatma said to Arjuna when he was overwhelmed with grief. Sanjaya uvacha tam tata kripaya vishtam Ashrupurnakulekshanam Vishidantam yidam vakyam Uvacha Madhusudanaha. Sanjaya said, Madhusudana addressed the following words to Arjuna, who was overwhelmed with compassion and drowned in distress and whose eyes were clouded with tears of despondence. Arjuna orders Sri Krishna Paramatma to place his chariot between the two armies so that he may behold the war-minded warriors who are prepared to risk their lives by fighting against such a valiant warrior as he. But the same heroic and zealous Arjuna, at the sight of his kinsmen, becomes overwhelmed with grief. His limbs give away, his mouth is parched, his body quivers, his hairs stand on end, his bow slips from his hand, his skin burns all over, and his mind reels. His stout-heartedness turns into faint-heartedness, and he sits on the seat of the chariot. Sanjaya expresses the same feelings of Arjuna, who was drowned in distress and despondency. Such a valiant warrior, Arjuna, was full of infatuation, and his eyes were so much drenched with tears that he could not even see clearly. Vishidantam idam vakyam uvacha Madhusudanaha. Sri Krishna Paramatma, that is Madhusudana, said the following words, the words which will be said in the second and third verses, to Arjuna, who was overwhelmed with grief because of his faint-heartedness. Here, Vishidantam uvacha was enough because the word vakyam is also included in the word uvacha. But the word vakyam has a special meaning. These words of Lord Krishna are very profound and uncommon. They attack Arjuna's faint-heartedness and despondency, which overpowered Arjuna in disguise of his duty. They make him aware of his vice and arouse curiosity in him for benediction. It is because of these profound words of Sri Krishna Paramatma that Arjuna, by becoming his disciple, seeks refuge in him. Sanjaya, by using the word Madhusudana, means to say that Lord Krishna is the killer of the demon Madhu. That is, he is the destroyer of the people having villainous nature, and so he will certainly destroy wicked-natured Duryodhana and his group. The next two verses contain what Sri Krishna Paramatma told Arjuna. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Kritastva Kashmalam Yidam Vishame Samupastitam Anaryajustam Asvargyam Akirtikaram Arjuna. The blessed Lord said, Arjuna, how has this infatuation overtaken you at this odd hour? It is shunned by noble souls, neither will it bring heaven nor fame to you. Sri Krishna Paramatma addresses him as Arjuna, which means pure in heart. The Lord means to say how he has become faint-hearted when it is quite unbecoming of him. Sri Krishna Paramatma, being surprised, asked Arjuna why he has developed faint-heartedness instead of valor and zeal at this juncture. A man is surprised in two ways, out of his own ignorance and as a warning to others. Sri Krishna Paramatma's surprise here is a warning to Arjuna so that he may be aware of his duty. Kuta means that this vice of faint-heartedness is not permanent in him. It is only a temporary phase which will slip away. Samupastitam means you are faint-hearted not only in words and feelings but also in actions. You are overpowered by this faint-heartedness and therefore you have sat on the seat of the chariot by abandoning your bow and arrows. Anarya Jushtam. Noble people don't accept faint-heartedness. They shun it because it does not lead them to any good. The noble men who want to attain salvation have their aim of attaining salvation during activity as well as non-activity. They don't shrink their duty. According to the prevailing circumstances, they perform their duty thoroughly with zeal and readiness in order to achieve emancipation. So it is not proper on his part to refrain from this duty of fighting because of faint-heartedness. Asvargyam. If we leave aside the goal of salvation and consider the matter from the worldly point of view, the attainment of heaven is the highest achievement. With this sort of faint-heartedness, you can't attain even heaven. Akirtikaram. Even without having the aim of attainment of heaven, a noble person performs those deeds which bring him name and fame in the world. But this faint-heartedness will defame you. So it does not befit you at all to be faint-hearted. Here, the Lord, by giving these three expressions, Anaryajustam, Asvargyam and Akirtikaram in sequence, has explained that there are three types of person. Thoughtful, whose aim is to attain benediction. Number 2, virtuous, who by doing virtuous actions want to attain heaven. 3, ordinary, who wants name and fame in the world. So, by giving the above mentioned three expressions, Sri Krishna Paramatma wants to warn Arjuna that the infatuation will bring him neither benediction nor heaven nor fame, but will degrade and defame him and lead him to hells. In the verse that follows, Sri Krishna Paramatma points out what to do when a person is in the grip of cowardice. Klaibyam asmagamappartha Naitatvayupapadyate Kshudram Hridaya Dhaurbalyam Tyaktvotishta Parantapa. O Partha, that is, son of Pritha, Kunti, yield not to unmanliness. It does not befit you. Cast off this petty faint-heartedness and wake up. O vanquisher, that is, scorcher of foes. Sri Krishna Paramatma addresses Arjuna as Partha to remind him of his mother Kunti's message and arouse the feelings of bravery which befits the members of the warrior class. It means that he should not disobey his mother by showing unmanliness. It is because of faint-heartedness that Arjuna perceives it righteous not to wage the war and unrighteous to wage the war. Therefore, in order to warn him, Sri Krishna Paramatma says that it is impotence rather than righteousness not to wage the war. So he should abandon this impotence. You should not have developed this impotence in you, because you are the son of a brave mother of warrior class and you yourself are also brave. Therefore, this impotence does not befit you at all. Parantapa, that is, you are the scorcher and vanquisher of foes. So will you gladden your enemies by showing your disinclination for the war? Kshudram means this faint-heartedness will make you petty, that is, it will deprive you of salvation, heaven or fame, and if you don't abandon it, you will become paltry. Secondly, this faint-heartedness is petty, so it is not difficult for such a brave person like you to abandon it. You are thinking that being virtuous you don't want to commit a sin by waging the war, but it is your faint-heartedness. So by abandoning it, you should discharge your duty by arraying yourself to wage the war. Sri Krishna Paramatma knows for certain that it is Arjuna's first and foremost duty to wage the war. So he, without caring for Arjuna's lame excuses, orders him quickly to wage the war with full preparation. In the first chapter, Arjuna gave several arguments against the war. But without attaching importance to his arguments, Sri Krishna Paramatma unexpectedly scolded Arjuna for the vice of his faint-heartedness and ordered him to array himself to wage the war. So Arjuna, without getting any satisfactory reply to his arguments, got excited and immediately spoke. Arjuna uvacha katam bhishmamaham samkhe dronam cha madhusudana ishubhi pratiyotsyami pujarha varisudana. Arjuna said, O slayer of Madhu, O slayer of foes, how shall I fight Bhishma and Drona with arrows on the battlefield? Both of them are worthy of worship. Here, Arjuna addresses the Lord as Madhusudana and Harisudana because he has killed unrighteous, villainous and cruel demands such as Madhu and so on, and foes also who always are jealous of others without rhyme or reason. But how can he kill his great well-wisher, the respected grandfather Bhishma and adorable preceptor Dronacharya, who have great affection for him? Arjuna says, I am not turning away from the war because of faint-heartedness, but because it is unrighteous for me to fight with the revered grandsire Bhishma and venerable teacher Drona. I would be called unmanly if I were afraid of death. I am not afraid of death, but I don't want to kill my venerable elders who have always been very affectionate to me. Grandfather Bhishma has loved me since my childhood. When I addressed him as father, he very affectionately used to say that he was my father's father. Similarly, my adorable preceptor Drona has been so kind to me that he imparted to me better training than he imparted even to his own son. He taught the use of Brahma weapon, that is, a kind of weapon which caused infallible destruction and was set in motion by incantation, to both of us, but as far as its control or end is concerned, he taught that secret only to me, not to his son. He also granted me the boon that no one would excel me in military science. So it is a mortal sin to wage war with them. Both Bhishma and Dronacharya, being elderly, are venerable and adorable. They have a right to attack me, but it is a deadly sin for me to fight against them with arrows. In the preceding verse, Arjuna, being excited, revealed his decision to Sri Krishna Paramatma. Now, being influenced by Sri Krishna Paramatma's words and balancing his decision with that of Sri Krishna Paramatma, he says, Guruna hatva hi mahanubhavan shreyo bhoktum bhaikshyamapi haloke hatvartha kamamstu guruni haiva bunjiya bhogan rudhira pradigdan. It is better to live on alms in this world than to slay these noble elders, because after killing them, we shall enjoy only blood-stained pleasures in the form of wealth and sense enjoyments. It seems after reading this verse that the words of Sri Krishna Paramatma uttered in the second and third verses have an effect on Arjuna. He is thinking that though Sri Krishna Paramatma knows it is not justified for him to kill his venerable elders, he is unable to understand why he is ordering him to wage the war. So Arjuna does not speak with excitement but speaks somewhat politely. Arjuna first presents his point of view, saying that if he did not fight with Reverend Bhishma and Dronacharya and other elders, Duryodhana by himself would not fight with him either. Thus he would lose his kingdom and suffer. Thus, he would be leading a life of misery and could even depend on alms. But he thinks it is better to live on alms than to slay his reverend elders. Iha loke means if I live on alms, people in the world will dishonor, reproach and insult me. But I think alms better than killing my reverend preceptors. Api, that is even, means for me, slaying the noble preceptors and living on alms both are forbidden. But I think that it is more sinful to kill the preceptors than to live on alms. If I carry out your command to wage the war, I shall enjoy the blood-stained pleasures which will not give me peace and salvation. Here a question may arise that Bhishma and Dronacharya and other preceptors were attached to Kauravas because of pecuniary motives. Therefore, what is the objection if Artha Kaman is taken as an adjective qualifying Gurun? The answer is that it is not proper because they had no desire for money. It was incumbent upon them to fight on Duryodhana's side because they had eaten his salt. Secondly, Arjuna has used the term Mahanubhavan, that is most noble. So, how can the most noble souls desire money? Those who desire money can't be most noble. Therefore, here Artha Kaman is the adjective which qualifies Bhogan. An exceptional fact. Sri Krishna Paramatma in the second and the third verses orders Arjuna to array himself by casting off petty faint-heartedness and wage the war. But Arjuna gets him wrong because he thinks that Sri Krishna Paramatma has ordered him to wage the war so that he may enjoy the pleasures of kingship. Arjuna perceived only evil in waging the war. He said that it would be better for him if his opponents killed him in the war. So, with his mind agitated with grief, he sat on the seat of the chariot. He had also said that Duryodhana and his companions, being goaded by greed, were prepared to wage the war. Now, Arjuna says for himself that if he carries out his order and wages the war, he will enjoy only blood-stained pleasures in the form of wealth and sensual enjoyments. Thus, he perceives nothing but evil in waging the war. When an evil comes to us in the form of an evil, it is easier to do away with it than when it comes in the garb of something good. Ravana and devil Kalanemi couldn't be recognized by Sita and Hanuman respectively, because both of them disguised themselves as saints. Similarly, Arjuna perceives that it is virtuous not to wage the war and it is an evil to wage the war, but he is completely mistaken. Hence, even Sri Krishna Paramatma finds it difficult and time consuming to bring Arjuna round to the realization of this fact. Today, in the name of unity in the society, people are determined to abolish the caste, that is a stage of life system, thinking of their action as virtuous. But they are not thinking about the disastrous consequences that this abolition will compel the people to lead a degraded and demoniacal life. In the same way, in the accumulation of wealth, people don't perceive falsehood, fraud, dishonesty, knavery and treachery, etc. as evils. Thus here, before Arjuna, also an evil of unmanliness has disguised itself as righteousness, and thus he sees how he can slay the noble elders. It means that whatever Arjuna considers a virtue is in fact an evil, but it does not appear to him to be an evil, as this evil of the abandonment of this duty has crept in the guise of the virtue of non-violence because of his attachment to his relatives. The holy words of God has such a singularity of effect that they have exerted a deep and far-reaching influence on Arjuna, as a result of which he starts doubting the correctness of his decision not to wage the war. In such a state of mind, Arjuna says, Nachaitad vidmak kataranno gariyo yadva jayema yadivano jayeyuhu yaneva hatva na jijivishamaha stevastita pramuke dardarashtraha. We don't know which is preferable for us to fight or not to fight, nor do we know whether we shall win or whether they will conquer us. The sons of Dhritarashtra, by killing whom we don't even wish to live, are arrayed against us. I can't take the decision whether I should wage the war or not because you consider it better to wage a war, but I don't do so, as it is a sin to kill the noble elders and preceptors. If I carry out your order and wage the war, we don't know whether we shall win or lose. Here, it does not mean that Arjuna has no confidence in his own power, but he is uncertain about the future because no one knows what may happen in the future. Not to speak of pleasures and kingdom, we don't even wish to live by killing our kinsmen, because by killing them we shall be bereaved of them, and thus shall suffer the pangs of bereavement. Dhritarashtra's sons are our kinsmen and they are arrayed against us. So, how can we kill them? We are damned if we wish to live by killing them. Finding himself at the crossroads, Arjuna being restless prays to Sri Krishna Paramatma. Karpanya doshopahata svabhavaha Prichami tvam dharma sammuda chetaha Yachreyasyan nishchitam bruhi tanme Shishyasteham shadimam tvam prapannam. My nature is weighed down with the vice of faint-heartedness, and my mind is confused with regard to duty. I entreat you, tell me, what is decidedly good for me? I am your disciple. Do instruct me, who have taken refuge in you. Arjuna did not think it desirable to turn away totally from the war, but to escape the sin he did not find any other alternative. So he wanted to turn away from the war, and he thought of the action as a virtue rather than a vice of faint-heartedness. But when Sri Krishna Paramatma called his action faint-heartedness and unmanliness, Arjuna was reminded of his duty as a member of the warrior class for whom it was not befitting to be retreat. So Arjuna, by accepting his faint-heartedness, says that first, his nature, even by being a member of the warrior class, was weighed down with the vice of faint-heartedness, and secondly, his mind was confused with regard to his duty. Being overpowered by delusion, he could not take the right decision about righteousness. In the third verse, Sri Krishna Paramatma ordered Arjuna, "Cast off your petty faint-heartedness and stand up for the war." So his doubt should have been removed, but he still had the doubt because on the one hand he thought that it was a sin to kill the kinsmen and the adorable elders, but on the other hand, being a member of the warrior class, it was his duty to wage the war. So he was confused with regard to his duty. So he entreats Sri Krishna Paramatma to tell him what his duty is. In the second verse of this chapter, Sri Krishna Paramatma told him that his dejection was shameful and it should be shunned by noble souls. So Arjuna thought that he should also follow the path adopted by noble souls. Therefore, he prays to Sri Krishna Paramatma to tell him what is decidedly good for him. First, Arjuna was agitated and distressed, but here he asked what is good for him. It shows that awakening for salvation as the goal is not aroused in a man so long as he is satisfied with his present situation. But when he is dissatisfied with his present situation and he wants to rise above it, he becomes aware of his real aim, salvation. When Arjuna entreated Sri Krishna Paramatma to tell him what was decidedly good for him, he thought that such a question could be put to a teacher, not a chariot driver. Arjuna's conviction that he was a chariot warrior while Krishna was his charioteer, to whom he ordered to place the chariot between the two armies, has now gone. So he becomes his disciple and also declares, "I am your disciple, so tell me what is decidedly good for me." Arjuna thinks that the preceptor can guide the disciple and the disciple will have to shoulder the responsibility to translate his teachings into practice and then make efforts to attain salvation. But he wants to hand over this responsibility to his preceptor. As the mother of an infant, not the child who falls sick, takes medicine for his recovery, the teacher takes responsibility of the disciple who takes refuge in him. So Arjuna, by depending on the teacher and surrendering himself to him, says, "I have taken refuge in you. Instruct me." Here, Arjuna, by using the phrase Tvam Prapannam, says that he has taken refuge in him. But actually, he has not taken refuge in him now. Had he taken refuge in him, he would have not uttered the words, "Instruct me," because a disciple has no responsibility of his own. The full responsibility lies with the teacher. Secondly, in the 9th verse, he says, "I shall not fight." It also shows that he has not really taken refuge in Sri Krishna Paramatma, otherwise, he might have not uttered these words. A disciple who takes refuge in his teacher has no duty, no responsibility of his own. He becomes merely an instrument in the hands of his preceptor and does whatever his teacher wants him to do. Therefore, Sri Krishna Paramatma in the 66th verse of the 18th chapter has to say, "Seek refuge in me alone." Then Arjuna in the 73rd verse of the 18th chapter says, "I shall act according to your word." It is here that Arjuna really takes refuge in him. In this verse, there are 4 points which needs attention. Number 1, my nature is weighed down with the vice of faint-heartedness, and I entreat you because my mind is confused with regard to duty. Second, tell me what is decidedly good for me. Third, I am your disciple. Fourth, instruct me who have taken refuge in you. If we think over these 4 points one by one, we come to know that as far as the first point is concerned, the person to whom the question is asked is free whether he answers the question or not. The second point shows that it is his duty to answer. In the third, the responsibility to guide the disciple so that he may attain salvation goes to the teacher. In the fourth, the full responsibility for salvation of the disciple is the teacher's. In the previous verse, Arjuna takes refuge in Lord Krishna, but he thinks that Sri Krishna Paramatma wants him to wage the war which he regards as unrighteous, and so he will again order him to wage the war. Secondly, he thinks that perhaps he has not been able to convey his feelings to him properly before. So, in the next verse, Arjuna clearly expresses his feelings to Sri Krishna Paramatma against the war. Nahi prapashyami mamapanudhyad yachchokamuchoshanamindriyanam avapya bhumavasapadnamruddham rajyam suranamapi chadipatyam. Even on obtaining undisputed sovereignty and an affluent kingdom on this earth and lordship over the gods, I don't see any remedy that can remove the grief which is drying up my senses. Arjuna thinks that Sri Krishna Paramatma wants him to wage the war so that he may gain victory and kingdom, and thus his grief may be removed. But he is so grief-stricken that even the joy of victory is not likely to remove his grief. Even if I obtain an undisputed sovereignty and affluent kingdom on this earth, and my subjects become happy and prosperous, and I may have no enemy on the earth, it will fail to remove my grief. Not to talk of the worldly pleasures, even lordship of Indra, that is king of gods, over the gods cannot remove my worry and grief. In verses 32 and 33 of the first chapter, Arjuna wanted to turn away from the war because of his attachment to his kinsmen. But here he wants to turn away from the war because he thinks that it is an obstacle to salvation. So there is a lot of difference between the two situations. How sad I shall become after the death of my kinsmen when I am so much grieved after thinking of it. If I grieved over the loss of the kingdom, it might be removed by gaining it. But I am grieved by thinking of the massacre of my kinsmen. If I gain the kingdom, it will rather enchant my grief, because who will enjoy the kingdom after the death of the kinsmen? Therefore, undisputed sovereignty and an affluent kingdom on this earth and lordship over the gods can't remove the grief that is parching my senses. What Arjuna did after saying that even the possession of material objects would not relieve him of his grief is contained in the verse that follows. Sanjaya uvacha एवमुक्त्वा हृषीकेशं गुडाकेशः परन्तप न योत्स्य इति गोविन्द मुक्त्वा तूष्णीं बभूवः. Sanjaya said, after addressing the Lord of the senses, thus Arjuna, the conqueror of sleep, said to him, I will not fight, and became silent. Arjuna honored the Lord's word and wanted to obey it. But after thinking seriously over what Sri Krishna Paramatma had said and applying his own mind to his own thoughts, came to the conclusion that the war could result in providing him with an affluent kingdom, honor and fame. But it wouldn't wipe out his grief, worry and misery. Therefore, it was not befitting for him to wage the war. So, Arjuna speaks his mind in clear words, I will not fight. Having declared his decision not to fight and having nothing more to say, Arjuna became quiet.